Commander Vextor stood on the bridge of his warship, staring out at the stars he had conquered. His 4 powerful arms rested at his sides, each one capable of wielding the deadly plasma blades that had made him a legend across the galaxy. His dark, armored body was covered in marks, each one representing a species he had destroyed. 17 different races had fallen before him, and he wore their defeat like badges of honor. For 20 cycles, Vextor had been unstoppable. Planets trembled when his ships appeared in their skies. Entire civilizations surrendered before he even landed. Those who resisted learned quickly that resistance meant only one thing: complete annihilation. The Crothian Empire had built its power on fear, and Vextor was their greatest weapon, their most feared warrior. He had never retreated, never hesitated, and certainly never lost. His latest target seemed almost laughable. A single human colony ship had wandered into Crothian territory, moving slowly through space like a lost child. The vessel was called the Pioneer's Hope, and according to his scans, it carried maybe 300 humans. 300 soft, weak creatures with no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They didn't even have proper weapons technology compared to the rest of the galaxy. Vextor's second-in-command approached him cautiously. "Commander, the human vessel has been located. Should we simply destroy it?" Vextor's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a Crothian smile. "No, I want them to surrender first. I want them to understand their place in this universe before they die." He moved to the communications console and opened channels on every frequency his ship could broadcast. His voice, deep and resonating with menace, filled the space between the 2 ships. "Human vessel, this is Commander Vextor of the Crothian Empire. You have entered our space without permission. Your species is unknown to us, which means you are unprotected by any treaty or alliance. Surrender your ship immediately, and I will make your deaths quick. Resist, and I will make them last for days." There was a moment of silence. Vextor waited, already imagining the panic happening aboard the human ship. He had given this speech dozens of times before. Usually, the begging started within seconds, but then a voice came through the speakers. It was calm, almost unnervingly so. A female human voice, steady and clear as ice. "This is Captain Rebecca Moore of the Pioneer's Hope. Your demand is denied. We will not surrender." Just one word would have been enough. She said no, like she was declining an invitation to dinner, not facing certain death. Vextor's eyes widened. His warriors on the bridge looked at each other in confusion. In 20 cycles, no one had ever simply said no. They begged, they negotiated, they offered tribute, but they didn't just refuse. A sound erupted from Vextor's throat, a horrible grinding noise that was Crothian laughter. "You dare refuse me? You don't even know who I am, do you, human? I am the unconquered. I am the breaker of worlds. 17 species have fallen before my blades." Rebecca's voice came back, still calm. 18 is going to be a lot harder than you think." The laughter died in Vextor's throat. This human had no fear in her voice. None at all. It was like talking to a machine, cold and calculated. Something about it made his warrior instincts tingle with warning, but he pushed the feeling aside. Humans were prey. Nothing more. "Prepare the boarding parties," he ordered. "We go in personally. I want every human on that ship to see what happens when they defy the Crothian Empire." His warriors moved quickly, arming themselves with plasma rifles and energy shields. 50 of the Empire's finest soldiers gathered in the boarding bay, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. These were veterans who had fought on 100 worlds. They had never failed. The boarding craft launched, crossing the distance between the ships in minutes. They clamped onto the Pioneer's Hope hull with a metallic clang, and the cutting torches began their work. Within seconds, the hull was breached, and the Crothian warriors poured through the opening. Vextor led from the front, as he always did. He expected to hear screaming, to see humans running in panic. Instead, he found something that made him pause. Silence. The corridor was empty and dark except for emergency lighting that cast everything in a red glow. The walls were bare metal, and the air smelled like oil and recycled oxygen. But there were no humans. No sound of panic. No crying children or desperate civilians. Spread out, Vextor ordered. Find them. His warriors moved down the corridor in formation, their weapons raised. They reached a junction and split into groups. That's when everything went wrong. The corridor behind the first group suddenly sealed with blast doors. Before they could react, the floor beneath them opened up, and 5 Crothian warriors fell into the ship's waste recycling system. Their screams were cut short. The second group triggered a pressure sensor. Improvised explosives, nothing more than fuel canisters rigged with detonators, erupted from the walls. 3 more warriors died instantly. Vextor realized with growing horror that the ship was a trap. Every corridor, every room had been turned into a weapon. The humans hadn't panicked. They had prepared. He pushed forward, rage building in his chest. Around a corner, he finally saw a human, a male, tall and lean, wearing a simple engineer's uniform. Tom Bradford stood in the middle of the corridor, his hand resting on a control panel in the wall. Finally, Vextor snarled, "A human with enough courage to face me." Tom looked at him with eyes that showed no fear, only calculation. "Courage has nothing to do with it," he said quietly. Then he pressed a button. The airlock doors on either side of the corridor slammed shut, sealing Vextor and his warriors in a small section. Tom was on the other side of the reinforced glass, still watching them with those cold eyes. "What have you done?" Vextor roared, slamming his fist against the glass. Tom's voice came through a speaker. "This section of the ship can be vented to space. I'm giving you 10 seconds to retreat to your boarding craft. After that, everyone in this corridor dies, including me if I'm still here. You're bluffing." Tom's hand moved to another button. 5 seconds. Vextor stared at the human, searching for any sign of deception. But Tom's face was like stone. This human was absolutely willing to kill himself just to take Crothian warriors with him. "Retreat," Vextor ordered, and his warriors scrambled back toward the breach point. They made it through just as the airlock opened, and the roar of escaping atmosphere chased them back to their boarding craft. Through the breach, Vextor saw Tom still standing there, having sealed himself in the safe section at the last possible second. The human wasn't suicidal. He was just willing to risk everything. Back on his warship, Vextor assessed the damage. 20 warriors lost, and they hadn't killed a single human. His second-in-command approached cautiously. "Commander, perhaps we should reconsider this engagement." Vextor's forearms grabbed the officer and lifted him off the ground. "We are Crothian. We do not retreat from prey." He threw the officer across the room and turned to his remaining forces. But deep inside, in a place he refused to acknowledge, Commander Vextor felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 cycles. Something small and sharp and uncomfortable. Doubt. Vextor wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. He gathered his best warriors, tripled the number from the first assault, and personally led them back onto the human ship. This time, they moved carefully, checking every corner, every shadow. Plasma rifles charged and ready, energy shields activated. They were prepared for traps. But preparation only goes so far when your enemy refuses to fight fair. The Crothians advanced down the main corridor in tight formation, their sensors scanning for explosives and ambush points. Everything seemed clear. The hallway stretched ahead, empty and silent. Vextor gave the signal to move forward. That's when the walls erupted. Plasma fired toward the corridor from hidden gun ports. Automated turrets the humans had rigged using salvage equipment. The Crothians scattered, returning fire, their shields absorbing most of the damage. Vextor roared commands, directing his warriors to suppress the turrets while engineers worked to disable them. They succeeded, but it cost them time and ammunition. And time was exactly what the humans wanted. Tom Bradford watched from his position in the security room, monitoring the Crothians through the ship's camera system. He'd been an engineer for 15 years, building colony habitats and mining stations. Now he was using everything he knew about construction to turn the ship into a coffin for their enemies. He typed commands into his console, routing power, sealing doors, and opening others. The Crothians thought they were advancing deeper into the ship. They didn't realize Tom was herding them exactly where he wanted them to go. "Group of 5 heading toward Cargo Bay 3, he said into his radio, his voice flat and professional. "Confirmed," came a reply. "I've got it." Tom switched cameras and watched as the 5 Crothian warriors entered the cargo bay, their weapons sweeping the large open space. Massive containers lined the walls, filled with supplies for the colony they'd been planning to build. The Crothians spread out, checking behind each container. Tom's finger hovered over a button. These were living beings he was about to kill. A week ago, the thought would have made him sick. But that was before these creatures had boarded his ship and tried to murder everyone he knew. Now, he felt nothing but cold calculation. He pressed a button. The cargo bay doors slammed shut, the emergency locks engaging with a heavy clang. The Crothians spun around, realizing too late they'd been trapped. They fired at the doors, but the reinforced metal held. One of them looked up at the camera, and Tom saw the fear in its alien eyes. He pressed another button. The exterior cargo doors opened, and everything in the bay was sucked out into space. Containers, equipment, and 5 Crothian warriors tumbled into the void. Tom watched through the external cameras as they clawed at nothing, their bodies freezing in the vacuum. It took less than 30 seconds. Tom's face remained emotionless. He switched cameras, looking for the next target. In another part of the ship, the medical bay had become a hunting ground. Lisa Grant had been a medic for 10 years, dedicated to saving lives and healing the injured. She'd taken an oath to do no harm. But that oath didn't cover alien invaders trying to slaughter her people. She'd spent the hours before the attack studying everything their database had on Crothian physiology. The colony ship's computers had information on dozens of alien species, gathered from trading posts and scientific exchanges. Lisa had memorized the location of every major artery, every vital organ, every weak point in their armored bodies. Now she put that knowledge to use. 2 Crothian warriors entered the medical bay, their weapons ready. The room was filled with hospital beds, medical equipment, and cabinets full of supplies. Plenty of places to hide. They moved slowly, checking each bed, each corner. Lisa waited in the ceiling crawl space, watching through a ventilation grate. She removed the grate screws hours ago, leaving it balanced in place. When the first warrior passed beneath her position, she pushed the grate aside and dropped silently behind him. Her scalpel was small, just a few inches of surgical steel, but she knew exactly where to put it. She drove the blade into the gap between Crothian's helmet and chest armor, finding the major artery that ran along the neck. Purple blood sprayed across the white medical equipment. The second warrior spun around, raising his rifle. Lisa was already moving, rolling behind a hospital bed. The plasma blast melted the bed's frame, but she was gone, ducking into the pharmacy section. The Crothian followed, growling in his own language. He was angry now, not being careful. That's what Lisa was counting on. She left a syringe on the counter, filled with a drug meant for human heart patients. A massive dose that would speed up cardiac function. She'd done the math. Crothian hearts were bigger than human hearts, but their metabolism was faster. The drug would work, just differently. The warrior came around the corner and saw her standing there, apparently cornered. He raised his weapon, mandibles clicking in what might have been a laugh. Lisa threw the syringe like a dart. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it didn't need to be. The needle stuck in the warrior's exposed throat, and she'd pre-pressed the plunger to release on impact. The drug flooded into his system. The Crothian stumbled, his heart suddenly racing beyond control. He fired wildly, plasma bolts scorching the walls. Lisa was already gone, slipping out through a maintenance door. Behind her, she heard the heavy thud of an armored body hitting the floor. 2 down. She moved on to find another position, another advantage. The ship was her territory, and she knew every inch of it. Vexthor was pushing deeper into the ship, losing warriors with every corridor. His rage was building with each loss. These humans were supposed to be weak, easy prey. Instead, they were killing his soldiers with tools and tricks and traps. He smashed through a barricaded door with his own strength, his 4 arms tearing the metal aside. Beyond it, he found what he'd been searching for. A group of humans, maybe 15 of them, armed with improvised weapons and whatever guns they'd managed to scavenge. And among them stood Captain Rebecca Moore. She was smaller than Vexthor, like all humans, Her uniform was dirty and torn, and she had a cut above her eye that leaked blood down her face. But she stood straight, a rifle in her hands, looking at him with the same calm expression she'd had when she first refused his demands. "Commander," she said, like they were meeting at a business conference. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Vexthor's four arms spread wide, each one holding a plasma blade that hummed with deadly energy. "Your tricks end here, human. I am Vexthor the Unconquered, and I will carve you apart personally." Rebecca glanced at the humans around her. They were scared. He could see that. Their hands shook. Their breathing was quick. But they didn't run. They stood their ground, weapons raised. "You call yourself Unconquered," Rebecca said, "but you've never fought anyone who refused to quit. That's about to change." She raised her hand, and Vexthor noticed she was holding something small, a detonator. "You're bluffing," Vexthor said, but his voice lacked confidence. He'd thought that about Tom, too. Rebecca's mouth curved into a small smile. "You really should have stayed home, Commander." She pressed a button. The charges the humans had planted throughout the engineering section detonated simultaneously. The deck beneath Vexthor's feet buckled and collapsed. He fell through 3 levels of the ship, surrounded by fire and screaming metal. His armor protected him from the worst of it, but he felt ribs crack, felt burns searing through gaps in his plating. He crashed into a lower deck, buried under debris. His vision swam, and purple blood filled his mouth. Around him, he could hear his warriors crying out in pain, those who had survived the fall. Vexthor dragged himself in the rubble, his armor cracked and smoking. One of his arms hung uselessly at his side, broken. His body screamed with pain. And for the first time in 20 cycles, Commander Vexthor felt true fear. Not fear of death. He'd faced that many times. This was different. This was the fear of meeting an enemy he couldn't beat, couldn't understand, couldn't conquer. These humans fought with a desperation and creativity that nothing in his experience had prepared him for. Above him, through the hole in the deck, he could see movement. The humans were already repositioning, already preparing their next trap. Vexthor realized with horrible clarity that he was no longer the hunter. He had become the prey. The battle that Vexthor thought would last hours stretched into days, then weeks. And with each passing day, his confidence crumbled a little more. He kept sending warriors onto human ship, wave after wave of his best soldiers. They had superior weapons, superior armor, superior numbers. By every logical measure, the humans should have been crushed in the first few hours. But logic seemed to mean nothing to these creatures. The humans adapted to everything. When the Crothians learned to spot their traps, the humans built new ones. When the Crothians figured out their tactics, the humans changed them. It was like fighting smoke, like trying to grab water with your hands. What disturbed Vexthor most was how the humans used everything. Everything. When their food ran low, they rationed it down to amounts that should have left them weak and starving. When their ammunition depleted, they made more from ship components that had nothing to do with weapons. When their people died, they stripped the bodies of anything useful, clothes, tools, even blood for medical transfusions. It was efficiency born of absolute necessity, and it was terrifying to witness. Vexthor watched from his ship's monitors as a human named Lieutenant Jack Peterson became a legend among the Crothian warriors, though not the kind of legend Vexthor wanted. Jack had been assigned to hold a narrow junction connecting 2 sections of the ship, a choke point that the Crothians needed to advance. Jack held that position for 6 hours. He'd built his rifle himself from spare parts, salvage components, and what looked like pieces of a water filtration system. It shouldn't have worked at all, but somehow he'd made it fire. For the first 2 hours, he picked off Crothian warriors who tried to rush his position, his shots precise and calculated. Then a Crothian grenade landed near his position. The explosion threw him against the wall, and when he tried to stand, his left leg bent at an angle that made even the Crothians wince. The bone had snapped completely. Any sensible soldier would have retreated, called for medical help, or at least taken cover. Jack tore a piece of his shirt, tied it around his leg as a makeshift splint, and kept fighting. He propped himself against the wall and continued shooting. When his ammunition finally ran out after 4 hours, the Crothians thought they had him. They rushed forward, expecting an easy kill. Jack swung his rifle like a club, the metal stock cracking against Crothian helmets and armor. He was hopping on one leg, his face twisted in pain. But he didn't stop. He fought like a cornered animal, all desperation and fury. When the rifle finally shattered from the impacts, Jack used the broken pieces. Then he used a metal pipe he'd torn from a wall. When that was knocked from his hands, he used his fists, hitting armor that his bare knuckles couldn't possibly damage, breaking his own hands in the process. It took 5 Crothian warriors to finally bring him down, and even then, he was still trying to fight as they dragged him away. The Crothians who fought him said his eyes never showed fear, just anger and determination. The humans eventually rescued him, pulling him back to their defended zones. Jack survived, though his leg would never fully heal. But the story of his stand spread through Crothian ranks like poison. They don't know when they're beaten. One warrior whispered to another in the barracks. They don't feel pain like normal creatures. Another added, I heard one of them kept fighting even after being shot 3 times. They're not natural. They're demons. Vexthor heard these whispers and tried to crush them with discipline and punishment. But fear is hard to kill once it takes root. His warriors had conquered dozens of species, but they'd never faced anything like humans. Most species fought to survive. Humans fought to make you regret ever starting the fight in the first place. The humans were down to maybe 100 survivors now, based on Vexthor's estimates. He still had over 300 warriors. The math should have been simple, but the math didn't account for the fact that humans seemed to fight harder the more desperate their situation became. They'd turned the entire ship into a fortress, a maze of death traps and kill zones. Every corridor one caused Vexthor's soldiers he couldn't replace. His supply lines were stretched thin. His warriors were exhausted and demoralized. But he was Vexthor the Unconquered. He couldn't retreat. He couldn't admit defeat to these primitive creatures. So he pushed forward, throwing more bodies into Grinder, watching his mighty force bleed away for inches of scorched metal corridor. Finally, after 3 weeks of constant combat, Vexthor's forces broke through to the command center. It had cost him 200 warriors, but he'd done it. The heart of the human ship was within reach. He led the final assault personally, his armor battered and scarred, one arm still not fully healed. His remaining warriors followed him to the last barricade, plasma weapons cutting through the reinforced doors. The command center was small, filled with monitors and control stations. Emergency lights cast everything in a red glow, and in the center of it all stood Captain Rebecca Moore, alone. She looked worse than when he'd last seen her. Her uniform was burned in places, stained with blood, some of it probably hers. She had bandages on her left arm, and her face was covered in cuts and bruises. But she stood straight, calm, her hand resting on a control panel. Vexthor's warriors spread out, surrounding her, weapons trained on her from every angle. There was nowhere for her to run, no more tricks to pull. It's over, human, Vexthor said, his voice rough from breathing recycled air for weeks. You fought well, better than I expected, but you've lost. Rebecca looked at him with those same calm eyes she'd had since the very beginning. Have I? Something about her tone made Vexthor pause. He'd heard that tone before, right before his warriors walked into traps. Your people are dead or dying. Your ship is in ruins. What victory could you possibly claim? Victory? Rebecca shook her head slightly. I'm not trying to win, Commander. I never was. I was just trying to make you understand something. Understand what? That some fights cost more than they're worth. She gestured around the ruined command center. You came here expecting an easy conquest. How many warriors have you lost? 200? More? How many ships' worth of resources have you spent? How much time? Vexthor's mandibles clicked in anger. You think you can negotiate now? After everything? I'm not negotiating. Rebecca's hand moved slightly on the control panel, and suddenly every screen in the command center lit up with the same image, a schematic showing the entire ship, with red dots marking hundreds of explosive charges. They were everywhere, in every section, every critical system. I rigged this ship to explode 2 weeks ago, Rebecca said quietly. I've been waiting for you to get here, to the command center, so you could see it for yourself. Vexthor stared at the screens, his blood running cold. You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy your own ship with your people still on it. My people evacuated to the escape pods 3 days ago. They're already gone, heading to the nearest trade station. I stayed behind to make sure you got the message." She looked directly at him, and he saw no deception in her eyes, only certainty. "You can have your victory, Commander. You can have this ship, this pile of scrap and bodies. Or you can have your life. But you can't have both. You have 30 seconds to decide." "You'll die too," Vextor said, but his voice lacked strength. "Yes," Rebecca agreed, "but I've made my peace with that." "Have you?" The command center was silent, except for the hum of electronics and the breathing of Crothian warriors. Vextor's mind raced. This had to be a bluff. Humans valued their lives, didn't they? They had to. Every species did. But then he remembered Jack Peterson fighting on a broken leg. He remembered Tom Bradford willing to vent himself into space. He remembered weeks of watching humans fight with injuries that should have killed them, never surrendering, never showing fear. Rebecca started counting. 20 seconds. Vextor, the unconquered, breaker of 17 species, conqueror of 100 worlds, made a calculation. Even if she was bluffing, even if he killed her right now, those charges might be on a timer. And if she wasn't bluffing, 15 seconds. He thought of his remaining warriors, barely 100 now. He thought of the 3 weeks wasted on this worthless colony ship. He thought of returning to the Crothian Empire with nothing to show for it but losses. 10 seconds. For the first time in 20 cycles, Commander Vextor made a choice that went against everything he believed in, everything he was. "Retreat," he said quietly. 5 seconds. "Retreat," he roared, and his warriors turned and ran. They fled to the corridors they fought so hard to take, back to their boarding craft, back to their ships. Vextor was the last to leave, looking back one final time at Rebecca Moore, still standing there with her hand on the detonator. She nodded to him, just once, a warrior's acknowledgement. Then Vextor turned and ran like he'd never run before in his life. Vextor's ships had barely cleared the human colony vessel when the explosion tore through space behind them. Rebecca Moore had kept her word. The blast was massive, turning the Pioneer's hope into an expanding cloud of debris and fire. Vextor didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His flagship limped through space, engine sputtering, hull breached in a dozen places. The battle had cost him more than warriors. His ship systems were failing one by one. Life support was running at 60%. Weapons were offline. The faster-than-light drive was damaged beyond his crew's ability to repair. "Get us to the nearest Crothian outpost," Vextor ordered. "We need repairs and reinforcements." His navigator worked the controls with trembling hands. "Commander, the nearest outpost is 3 weeks away at our current speed. We don't have enough fuel to—" "Then find a way." Vextor slammed his fist on the console, cracking the display. They drifted through space for 2 days, making what repairs they could with limited resources. Vextor spent those days in his quarters, trying to process what had happened. He'd retreated, actually retreated. The word felt like poison in his mind. On the 3rd day, the sensors picked up a ship approaching from behind. A human ship. "Identify it," Vextor demanded, rushing to the bridge. His sensor officer's voice shook. "It's a human military vessel. Commander. Designation Retribution." The name hit Vextor like a physical blow. Of course, that's what they call it. Humans apparently had a sense of drama to match their stubbornness. "How did they find us?" Vextor growled. "We left no trail, no beacon." "Unknown, Commander, but they're closing fast. Their ship is small, maybe a crew of 50, but it's armed and moving with purpose." Vextor studied the sensor readout. One ship. Just one human ship chasing after his damaged flagship. The audacity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. Did they really think they could take him down with a single vessel? Then again, he thought 300 warriors could take down one colony ship. That hadn't gone well either. "Can we outrun them?" he asked. The navigator checked his instruments. "No, sir. They're faster, and our engines are barely functioning." "Then we fight." Vextor straightened, feeling his warrior pride resurface. "Prepare whatever weapons we have left. When they get close, we hit them with everything. But Vextor was a warrior, not a fool. He knew his ship was crippled, his crew exhausted and demoralized. He needed an advantage. He pulled up a star chart and found what he was looking for. A gas giant with massive ring systems, just 4 hours away. Set course for that planet, he ordered. We'll use the rings as cover. Set up an ambush. Let these humans come to us. His crew worked quickly, nursing the damaged ship toward the gas giant. The human vessel followed at a distance, not rushing, not attacking, just following, like a predator that knew its prey was wounded and had nowhere to go. They reached the gas giant and slipped into the rings, massive chunks of ice and rock that would confuse sensors and provide cover. Vextor positioned his ship behind one of the larger asteroids and waited, weapons charged and ready. The human ship, Retribution, entered the ring system an hour later. It moved cautiously, scanning the debris fields. Vextor watched on his monitors, waiting for the perfect moment. They're moving into range, his weapons officer reported. Hold, Vextor said. Wait for a clear shot. The human ship came closer, weaving between the asteroids. Just a little more, Vextor thought. Just a little. Retribution suddenly changed course, accelerating hard to the side. At the same moment, it fired a spread of missiles, not at Vextor's position, but at the asteroid he was hiding behind. The missiles impacted, and the asteroid shattered into thousands of pieces, exposing Vextor's ship. Before he could react, Retribution fired again, plasma bolts striking his already damaged engines. Evasive maneuvers, Vextor shouted. His ship tried to move, but the engines were too damaged. They managed to turn slightly, enough that the next volley missed critical systems, but they were exposed now, vulnerable. Vextor realized with growing horror that the humans had known exactly where he was. They'd probably known the whole time. They'd let him think he was setting a trap, while they were really setting one for him. The battle that followed was brutal and one-sided. Retribution moved through the rings like it belonged there, firing with precision, always staying just out of range of Vextor's damaged weapons. Every shot the humans took was calculated, measured. They weren't trying to destroy his ship. They were hurting him. Vextor saw it too late. Each attack drove him closer to the gas giant itself, deeper into the massive planet's gravity well. His navigator was screaming warnings, but there was nothing they could do. The engines couldn't generate enough power to escape. They're pushing us toward the planet, the navigator yelled. I can see that. Vextor roared back. Give me options. We don't have any. If we get any closer, the gravity will tear us apart. Commander David Wright sat in the captain's chair aboard Retribution, watching the Crothian flagship struggle. His face showed no emotion, no satisfaction. Just cold, professional focus. Targeting their stabilizers, his weapons officer said. Fire, David replied simply. The shot was perfect, taking out the Crothian ship's stabilizing thrusters. The flagship began to spin, slowly at first, then faster as the gas giant's gravity took hold. They're breaking apart, sir, the sensor officer reported. Life pods, David asked. For launching now. The rest of the crew is going down with the ship. David nodded. Track those pods. Don't lose them. On the Crothian flagship, alarms screamed as the hull began to buckle under the gravitational stress. Vextor knew his ship was lost. The only question now was whether he'd die with it or take his chances in an escape pod. Pride said stay. Survival said go. All remaining crew to the escape pods. Vextor ordered. Abandon ship. The rush to the pods was chaotic. Warriors pushed and shoved, panic finally breaking through their training. Vextor made sure his bridge crew got to pods first, then grabbed 3 of his best warriors and made for the last remaining pod. They sealed themselves inside and launched, the small craft shooting away from the dying flagship. Through the viewport, Vextor watched his mighty warship twist and crumble, pulled apart by forces no armor could resist. It broke into pieces and fell into the gas giant's atmosphere, burning like a meteor. 20 cycles of victories, gone in a flash of fire. Where are we going? One of his warriors asked. Anywhere away from here, Vextor replied, punching coordinates into the pod's basic navigation system. But the pod sensors immediately showed a problem. The human ship was still there, moving to intercept their trajectory. "They're not letting us go," another warrior said, his voice hollow. Vextor tried to change course, but the pod was small, slow, and had limited fuel. Retribution matched every move easily, driving them away from space, away from any escape route, toward a barren moon orbiting the gas giant. "They're forcing us down," Vextor said, understanding flooding through him. "They want us on that moon." "Why not just destroy us?" a warrior asked. Vextor didn't answer, but he knew. The humans could have killed him a dozen times already. They could have blown his flagship apart from a distance, could have shot down his escape pod the moment it launched. But they hadn't. They wanted him alive. They wanted him on the ground, where they could face him directly. The escape pod hit the moon's atmosphere hard, the heat shields barely holding. They crashed into the rocky surface with bone-jarring force, the pod tumbling across a canyon floor before finally coming to rest against a boulder. Vextor and his 3 warriors crawled from the wreckage, bruised and battered but alive. The moon was a dead place, all gray rock and thin atmosphere. The gas giant dominated the sky above them, a massive swirl of colors that provided the only light. In the distance, maybe a kilometer away, Vextor saw another ship landing. Retribution settled onto the surface with controlled precision, its landing gear deploying smoothly. "They're coming down," one warrior said unnecessarily. Vextor checked his weapons. He had 2 plasma blades left, undamaged. His warriors had sidearms and combat knives. "Not much, but it would have to do." "Why didn't they just kill us from orbit?" a warrior asked, voicing what they all wondered. Vextor watched as a ramp extended from Retribution and figures began to emerge. Human figures, armed and armored, moving with military precision. Because, Vextor said quietly, they want to do this personally. The humans weren't going to execute him from a safe distance. They were coming to hunt him down, face to face, the way Vextor had hunted so many others. The hunter had become the prey. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Vextor felt a cold certainty. These humans were very, very good at hunting. The barren moon had no water, no shelter, and barely enough atmosphere to breathe. Vextor and his 3 warriors had only the supplies from their crashed escape pod, some emergency rations, basic medical kits, and their weapons. They had no way off the moon, no way to call for help. The only other living things on this entire rock were the humans who had landed a kilometer away. And those humans were coming. On the first day, Vextor tried to establish a defensive position in a canyon that offered some cover. His warriors were experienced fighters, veterans of dozens of campaigns. They set up a perimeter, conserved their energy, and watched the horizon. The humans didn't rush. They took their time, moving through the rocky terrain like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. They had supplies, equipment, and a ship to return to. Vextor had nothing but time running out. The first warrior died on the afternoon of day 1. His name was Krell, and he'd served under Vextor for 8 cycles. He was on watch, scanning the canyon rim, when a single shot rang out from somewhere in the rocks. The plasma bolt took him in the head, dropping him instantly. Vextor and the others scrambled for cover, searching for the shooter. They saw nothing. No movement, no muzzle flash, nothing. Whoever had fired was already gone, repositioned. "Show yourselves." Vextor roared at the empty rocks. "Fight with honor." No response came, just the wind whistling through the canyon. Sergeant Mike Torres lowered his rifle and moved to a new position, his boots silent on the rocky ground. He'd been a sniper in the human military for 12 years before joining the colony expedition. He knew patience, knew how to wait for the perfect shot, knew how to disappear into terrain that seemed to offer no cover at all. He'd volunteered for this hunt. They all had. When Captain Moore had told him about the Crothian commander who'd attacked the Pioneer's Hope, who'd killed their friends and families, everyone wanted to be part of bringing him down. Mike moved 300 meters, found a new vantage point, and settled in to watch. He had time. The Crothians didn't. The second warrior died on day 2. Vextor had kept the remaining 3 close together, thinking there was safety in numbers. But the canyon they'd chosen for defense became a trap when the humans sealed both ends with controlled rock slides. They were boxed in, with only the steep canyon walls as an escape route. Vextor ordered his warriors to climb, to reach the high ground. They were halfway up when Lieutenant and Cooper made her move, and had been a rescue climber before joining the colony. Someone who scaled mountains to save stranded hikers. She'd spent the night climbing around the canyon in the dark, positioning herself above where she predicted the Crothians would go. When the second warrior pulled himself over a ledge and was waiting, she'd wedged herself into a crevice, invisible from below. Her knife was quick and quiet. The warrior fell back down the cliff without making a sound. Vextor and his last warrior made it to the top, but they knew now that the humans could be anywhere, could strike from any direction. They stopped trying to hold positions and just started running, trying to put distance between themselves and their hunters. But you can't outrun someone who knows exactly where you're going. The third warrior died on the morning of day 3. His name was Thax, and he'd been Vextor's friend as much as his subordinate. They'd fought together on 6 different worlds. Thax had saved Vextor's life twice. They were moving through a narrow pass between 2 rock formations when Corporal James Miller stepped out in front of them. Just stepped out, like he'd been waiting there the whole time, which he had been. James had tracked their movement for hours, predicted their path, and gotten ahead of them. He stood blocking the pass, a rifle in his hands but not raised. Just standing there. Go around, James said calmly. The commander only. Your friend stays. Thax raised his plasma pistol. Vextor run. I'll hold him. Thax, no. Vextor started. But Thax was already moving, firing as he charged. James dodged the first shot, rolled under the second, and came up close. The fight was brutal and quick. Thax was bigger, stronger, had more arms and natural weapons. But James fought like all the humans fought, with precision, creativity, and absolute commitment. When it was over, Thax lay still on the ground, and James stood over him, breathing hard, bleeding from a cut on his arm but alive. He looked at Vextor, who had stopped running and was staring back. Keep moving, Commander, James said. She's waiting for you. Vextor ran. He ran like a coward, leaving his last warrior behind. He ran through canyons and over rocks, his lungs burning in the thin air, his body exhausted from 3 days without real food or water. He ran until he couldn't run anymore, until his legs gave out, and he collapsed in a narrow canyon, his back against the rock wall. He was alone now, completely alone. His warriors were dead, his ship was destroyed, his empire was far away, and he was so very tired. Footsteps echoed in the canyon, slow, measured, unhurried. Vextor looked up and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. Captain Rebecca Moore stepped into view, and Vextor's eyes widened in shock. She was supposed to be dead. He'd seen the explosion, seen her ship destroyed. But here she stood, very much alive. She looked different now. Her face bore scars from burns, probably from the explosion. One side of her face had healed rough, the skin twisted and discolored. But her eyes were the same, calm, cold, and utterly without fear. You survived, Vextor said, his voice hoarse. The escape pod, remember? Rebecca said, I told you my people evacuated. I was with them. She carried a rifle in her hands. The barrel pointed at the ground. She could have shot him from a distance, could have ended this the moment she spotted him, but she walked right up to him instead, close enough that he could see every detail of her scarred face. Rebecca raised a rifle, aiming at his head. Then she lowered it again, waiting. Vextor understood what she was doing. She was giving him a choice. He could attack her, try to kill her with his last remaining blade, die fighting like a warrior should. It would be quick, clean, honorable. That's what the old Vextor would have done. The unconquered, the breaker of worlds. He would have charged her with a roar, would have forced her to kill him in combat, would have died with his pride intact. But as Vextor looked into Rebecca's eyes, he saw something that broke whatever was left of his warrior spirit. She'd already won. They both knew it. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was a lesson, a demonstration, a message written in the bodies of his warriors and the wreckage of his ship. Humanity had beaten him in every possible way. Tactically, strategically, physically, and now psychologically. He had nothing left. No ship, no warriors, no hope. His legend was gone. His pride was shattered. His identity as the unconquered was a lie he could no longer tell himself. The great commander Vextor, terror of 17 species, conqueror of 100 worlds, fell to his knees in the dust. "Mercy," he whispered, the human word feeling strange in his mouth. He'd learned it from their broadcasts, from the messages they'd sent begging him not to attack their colony ship. He'd laughed at that word then. It felt different now. "Please." The canyon was silent except for the wind. Rebecca looked down at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You know what mercy costs?" she asked finally. Vextor said nothing. He had no answer. "You have 2 choices, Commander," Rebecca continued. "You can die here, right now. I'll make it quick. You'll die like a warrior, and whatever honor you think you still have, you can keep it. That's option 1. She paused, letting that sink in. Option 2 is harder. You live, but you go back to your empire, and you tell them exactly what happened here. You tell them how 300 Crothian warriors couldn't beat 300 human colonists. You tell them how your flagship was destroyed by a single human ship. You tell them how you, the great Vextor the Unconquered, begged a human for mercy." Rebecca crouched down, getting to his eye level. "You become our messenger. You make sure that every Crothian, every species in your empire, knows what happens when they make an enemy of humanity. You spend the rest of your life as a living warning. That's option 2. Vextor's mind raced. Die with honor or live with shame. Die as a warrior or live as a cautionary tale. The old Vextor would have chosen death without hesitation. But the old Vextor was dead, killed somewhere in the corridors of the Pioneer's Hope, buried in the wreckage of his flagship. "I choose life," he whispered. Rebecca stood up, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "Then get up. We have a long walk back to my ship." Vextor struggled to his feet, his body protesting every movement. Rebecca didn't help him. She just watched, making sure he could walk. "Why?" Vextor asked as they started moving. "Why let me live?" Rebecca glanced at him. "Because dead, you're just another casualty. Alive, you're proof. You're evidence that humans aren't prey, that we fight back, that we win." She looked forward again. "And because the next Crothian commander who thinks about attacking human colonies will hear your story and maybe, just maybe, decide it's not worth it." They walked in silence for a while, Rebecca leading, Vextor following like a prisoner, which is exactly what he was. "Will they believe me?" Vextor asked. "My own people? They'll believe you," Rebecca said, "because you'll show them the scars. You'll show them the fear in your eyes when you talk about humans. You can fake a lot of things, Commander, but you can't fake that kind of fear." She was right. Vextor could feel inside him now, a cold weight that would never leave. Fear of humans, respect for their stubborn refusal to give up, understanding that they were far more dangerous than they appeared. When they reached Retribution, the other humans were waiting, Mike and James and a dozen others. They watched Vextor with hard eyes, but they didn't attack him. Rebecca had given her word, and they followed her lead. They gave Vextor a basic ship, barely functional, with just enough fuel to reach Crothian space. No weapons, no advanced technology, just enough to get home. As he prepared to leave, Rebecca came to see him one last time. "Remember this, Commander," she said. "Humans don't start fights, but we finish them." Vextor nodded. He had no words left. He flew back to the Crothian Empire alone. And when he arrived, he did exactly what he promised. He told his story, every humiliating detail. The officials who heard him wanted to execute him for cowardice, for retreat, for failure. But then they saw his eyes when he talked about humans. They heard the tremor in his voice. They understood that this wasn't a warrior who'd lost his nerve. This was a warrior who'd met something that broke the very concept of what winning meant. The story spread through the Crothian Empire like wildfire. The Unconquered, brought to his knees, the breaker of worlds, broken himself. And when other species heard the story, they listened too. Humans weren't the weak prey they appeared to be. They were something far more terrifying. They were survivors who fought with intelligence, creativity, and a stubbornness that bordered on insanity. The galaxy learned a new lesson that day. You could be stronger than humans, faster than humans, more advanced than humans. But if you made an enemy of humanity, you'd better be prepared for a fight that would cost you everything. even if you won, because humans didn't fight to win. They fought to make sure you never forgot what it cost to fight them in the first place.